My name is Frank. I'm 68 years old. At 68, you don't really introduce yourself anymore. People introduce your age for you. Frank is 68, like I'm a used car. 68 years old, runs pretty well. A few noises in the suspension, some rust around the knees. And I have noticed something strange about getting older. People stop asking what you do. When I was 40, everybody asked, "What do you do for a living?" At 55, "Are you still working?" At 62, "When are you going to retire?" At 68, "Are you okay?" That's it. Nobody cares what you do. They just want to know if you're functioning. I went to the pharmacy last month. The young woman behind the counter looked at me and said, "Can I help you find anything?" I said, "No, thank you. I'm just looking." She said, "Okay." Then she followed me. I thought, that's nice. Maybe she was being helpful. Then I realized she was watching me. I picked up a bottle of vitamins. She watched. I put it down. She watched. I picked up cough drops. She watched. I said, "I'm not stealing anything." She said, "I didn't say you were." I said, "You're following me." She said, "I work here." I said, "I know. That's what makes it suspicious." She laughed. I didn't. I'm 68. At this age, I don't know if people are being helpful or conducting a field study. My doctor does it too. Every time I see him, he looks at me like I'm a refrigerator that has started making a strange noise. "How are you feeling, Frank?" "Fine." "Any pain?" "No." He looks at me. I say, "Well, some." "How much?" "Enough." "Where?" "Mostly everywhere." He writes something down. I say, "What did you write?" "Nothing." Doctors should never say nothing. If a doctor says nothing, you start wondering what he didn't tell you. My wife comes to the doctor with me now. She says it's because she wants to remember what the doctor says. That's not why. She comes because she doesn't trust me to accurately report my own body. Doctor says, "You should walk more." My wife says, "I told him." Doctor says, "You should reduce sugar." My wife says, "I told him." Doctor says, "You should get more sleep." My wife says, "I told him." I look at the doctor. I say, "Are you my physician or her witness?" He laughs. My wife doesn't. That's marriage. You can make a joke. You just have to know which person is allowed to laugh. I've been married for 41 years. 41. At this point, my wife and I don't really have conversations. We have briefings. "Dinner's ready." "Okay." "The trash is full." "Okay." "Your brother called." "Okay." "Did you move my keys?" "No." "Are you sure?" "Yes." "Because they're not where I left them." "That sounds like a problem between you and the keys." She looks at me. I say, "I'm going to stop talking now." I've learned. Marriage is not about always being right.
Marriage is about knowing when being right is going to cost you money. And at 68, I have discovered that retirement does not mean what I thought it meant. I thought retirement meant freedom. I pictured myself waking up whenever I wanted, drinking coffee slowly, reading the newspaper, going fishing, taking trips, maybe sitting on the porch, watching the sunset. Nobody telling me what to do. That was the dream. Then I retired. My wife waited exactly 24 hours. The next morning, she walked into the kitchen holding a piece of paper. She said, "Since you're not working anymore?" I knew immediately. Those words should come with a warning label. "Since you're not working anymore." I said, "Yes." She handed me the paper. "What is this?" "A few things around the house." I looked at the paper. It was 2 pages. I said, "This is not a few things." She said, "It is." I counted. There were 37 items. She said, "Some of them are small." I said, "Replace the gutters?"
Yes. Clean the garage? Yes. Paint the guest room? Yes. Fix the fence? Yes. Organize the basement? Yes. Repair the bathroom cabinet? Yes. Clean the attic? Yes. I looked at her. I said, "Did I retire or did I get transferred?" She laughed. I didn't. She said, "You'll have plenty of time now." I said, "I thought retirement was supposed to be relaxing." She said, "It is." "Then why is there a list?" She said, "Because you're relaxed." That's when I realized something. I didn't retire. I changed employers. My old boss gave me a paycheck. My new boss gives me leftovers. My old boss had an office. My new boss has a master bedroom. My old boss gave me vacation days. My new boss says, "Since you're home," I had been retired for less than 48 hours, and already I missed work. At work, if someone asked me to fix something, there was usually a budget. At home, my wife just points. "Can you fix that?" "What happened?" "I don't know."
How long has it been broken? I don't know. What does it do? I don't know. So why do you think I can fix it? Because you're retired. Apparently, retirement comes with magical mechanical abilities. I am now expected to understand plumbing, electrical work, carpentry, painting, gardening, technology. I spent 40 years building a career. My reward was becoming a handyman. And here's the worst part. My wife doesn't even call me a handyman. She calls me Frank. That's enough. Frank? Yes? Can you come look at this? I don't even ask what this is anymore. I just follow her. Because at 68, you learn that every time your wife says, "Come look at this," you're about to discover a new responsibility. And that was how my retirement began. Not with golf, not with fishing, not with a tropical vacation, with a leaking kitchen faucet, and my wife saying, "Since you're home now." Before we go any further, let me tell you something. I don't hate technology.
I just don't understand why technology hates me. When I was young, technology was simple. A telephone was a telephone. A television was a television. A refrigerator was a refrigerator. A car was a car. You didn't need an account to use any of them. You didn't need a password. You didn't need an update. You didn't need to accept cookies. You didn't need to agree to terms and conditions. You just turned the thing on. And it worked. We had one telephone in our house. One. It was attached to the wall. That was the entire phone system. You couldn't take it with you. You couldn't lose it. You couldn't drop it in a toilet. You couldn't check it while driving. And nobody could text you while you were sleeping. If the phone rang, everybody heard it. You couldn't pretend you didn't. Today, you can ignore a phone call while looking directly at the person calling. When I was growing up, if you didn't answer the phone, it meant you weren't home. Simple.
Nobody thought, maybe Frank saw the call and is emotionally processing whether he wants to respond. No, Frank wasn't home. Try again later. I miss that. Today, if you don't answer a call in 30 seconds, people start asking questions. My wife calls me. Sometimes I'm standing right beside her. She says, "Frank, where are you?" I say, "I'm here." "I called you." "I know." "Why didn't you answer?" "I was washing my hands." "You had your phone." "Yes." "So?" "So my hands were wet." "You could have answered." "How?" "Speakerphone?" "While I'm washing my hands?" "Yes." I say, "You know what? I don't want to have this conversation." She says, "Fine." There it is, that word, fine. People think fine means fine. It doesn't, especially when your wife says it. Fine means you have chosen the wrong path. Okay means I have heard you. Whatever means you have approximately 10 seconds to improve this situation.
And nothing means something is happening, but you're not emotionally prepared to hear about it. I learned all of this after 41 years. Young men think marriage is about romance, flowers, dinner, holding hands. Young men are adorable. Marriage is mostly about decoding tone. My wife can say my name 17 different ways. Frank, normal. Frank, concerned. Frank, suspicious. Frank, dangerous. Frank, emergency. And then there is silence. Silence is the most expensive one. Silence means I have already lost. Technology has made marriage even more complicated. My wife can now text me from the next room. She'll send, "Can you come here?" I text, "Where?" She says, "Kitchen." I walk into the kitchen. She's not there. I text, "Where in the kitchen?" She says, "Pantry." I walk to the pantry. She isn't there. I text, "Where are you?" She says, "Living room." I walk to the living room. She's sitting on the couch. I say, "You know you could have just called me."
She says, "I didn't want to yell." I say, "You texted me 6 times." "Yes." "That is more effort than yelling." She says, "Frank." I say, "Okay." I have learned. When I was young, my mother didn't need a phone to know where I was. She had instincts. I'd come through the door, she'd say, "Where have you been?" I'd say, "Outside." "Where outside?" "Just outside." "With who?" "Friends." "What friends?" "Friends." "What are their names?" "Why?" "Because I'm your mother." That was the end of the discussion. No GPS, no location sharing, no tracking app, no Find My Friends. My mother had a look. That look could locate me anywhere in a 10-mile radius. My father had an even simpler system. He'd say, "Be home by 11." I said, "Okay." He said, 11 means 11. Okay. Not 11:30. Okay. Not midnight. Okay. 11. Okay. Then, don't make me come looking for you. That sentence had more tracking power than anything on my phone. I believed him. Today, parents can literally see where their children are, and the kids still say, "I don't know where I am." How? Your phone knows. Your shoes probably know. The pizza delivery driver knows. The family dog probably knows. But you don't. When I was young, if you got lost, you were actually lost. You stopped at a gas station. You asked someone, "Excuse me, how do I get to Main Street?" And the guy would say, "Go 3 blocks, turn left at the church, keep going until you see the red barn." That was navigation. You had to remember it. Today, GPS tells you exactly where to go. And if you miss a turn, it says, "Recalculating." I hate that word. Recalculating. It sounds disappointed, like the GPS is sitting there thinking, "Well, Frank screwed that up." I missed an exit once. My GPS said, "Make a U-turn when possible." I said, "I know." My wife looked at me. I said, "What?" She said, "Are you arguing with the GPS?" I said, "No." She said, "You are." I said, "It's wrong." She said, "It's a machine." I said, "Exactly." The old days had fewer conveniences, but they also had fewer ways to embarrass you. If you did something stupid in 1982, the people who saw it knew. That's it. Today, somebody has video. You trip? Video. You fall? Video. You dance badly? Video. You say something stupid? Video. Your generation doesn't have embarrassing memories. You have evidence. That's different. My grandson once asked me why I don't use social media. I said, I don't need thousands of strangers knowing what I had for lunch. He said, people don't care what you had for lunch. I said, then why do they post pictures of it? He didn't answer. Because there is no answer. Everything is public now. I remember when people used to say, mind your own business. Now we pay a monthly subscription to tell strangers our business. We photograph our food, our vacations, our pets, our children, our feet, our coffee, our opinions about other people's opinions.
And then we get upset when someone doesn't like our opinion. My generation had neighbors. Today, people have followers. I don't know which is better. My neighbor knew when I was home. My followers know what I ate. I'm not sure that's progress. My wife and I met when I was young. Back then, I was romantic. I wrote her letters. I bought flowers. I took her to dinner. I dressed nicely. I stayed out late. Now, 41 years later, I know what true romance is. True romance is when she goes to the grocery store and says, "Do you need anything?" And I say, "No." And she comes home without asking me to go with her. That's love. That's commitment. That's intimacy. When you're young, you want candlelight. When you're 68, you want parking. I don't care how romantic the restaurant is. If I have to park 6 blocks away, the romance is over. Give me a restaurant with easy parking, comfortable chairs, quiet music, and a bathroom on the same floor. I'll propose again. My wife still likes romantic restaurants. The kind where the tables are 3 inches apart, the music is loud, the lights are so dim you need a flashlight to read the menu. She says, "Isn't this nice?" I say, "I can't hear you." She says, "I said, isn't this nice?" "I can't hear you." She leans forward. "Isn't this nice?" I say, "Why are you yelling?" She says, "Never mind." That's our date. We sit in silence for 45 minutes. Then we go home. And honestly, that's pretty romantic. Because we don't have to talk. We've been married long enough to know what the other person is thinking. My wife looks at me. I know. She's thinking, why did you buy that? I look at her. I know she's thinking, why are you wearing that? She looks at me. I know she's thinking, you forgot something. I say, what? She says, nothing. I say, okay. She says, exactly. Sometimes I think marriage is just 2 people repeatedly saying nothing until someone finally admits what happened. One of the most dangerous questions in marriage is, do you notice anything different? Never answer quickly. Never. The first time my wife asked me that, I was confident. I said, you changed your hair. No. New earrings? No. New shirt? No. Moved the furniture? No. You bought something? No. At this point, my heart was beating like I was defusing a bomb. She said, I moved the lamp. I said, of course. She said, you didn't notice. I said, I noticed the lighting was different. She stared at me. I said, I'm trying to stay married. That was 40 years ago. I've improved. Now when she asks, do you notice anything different? I say, yes. She says, what? I say, I'll let you tell me. That's experience. I've learned not to guess. Guessing is how men get into trouble. My wife once came downstairs wearing a new dress. She said, how do I look? I said, beautiful. She smiled. Then she said,
Does it make me look heavy? I said, no. She smiled. Then, really?
Yes. Be honest. I am.
Are you just saying that?
Yes.
No!
I said, wait, what? She laughed. I said, I don't understand the rules. She said, you're supposed to say I look great. I did. Then why did you say yes? I don't know. This is why men age, not because of biology, because of conversations like this. We lose testosterone trying to understand pronouns. My wife also has a special phrase. It's up to you. That's never true. Once she said, what do you want to do this weekend? I said, nothing. She said, it's up to you. I said, okay, I'll stay home. She said, you don't want to go anywhere? I thought you said it was up to me. It is. Then I'm staying home. Fine. There it was. Fine. I immediately changed my clothes. I said, where are we going? She said, I don't care. I said, anywhere. She said, okay. Where? I don't know. Dinner? Sure. Where? I don't care. I suggested 3 restaurants. She rejected all 3.
I said, you said you don't care.
I don't.
Then why did you reject them?
I just don't want those.
I said, okay. She said, why do you keep saying okay? Because I have nothing left. Marriage is compromise. Usually I compromise first. My wife says that's because I'm stubborn. I say it's because I value peace. She says, you're finally learning. I say, see? And that's the secret. After 41 years, you stop trying to win arguments. You start trying to end them. There's a difference. When you're 25, you want to prove you're right. At 68, you want to finish your coffee while it's still hot. Priorities change. My wife and I have also developed a sophisticated communication system for grocery shopping. She says, we need a few things. I know better. A few things means the cart will be full. We enter the store. She says, stay with me. 5 minutes later, she's gone. I don't chase her. I learned. I stand beside the cart. A woman walks past. She looks at me. She says, are you waiting for your wife? I say, yes. She says, smart man. I say, I've been married 41 years. She nods. Say no more. Exactly. Marriage creates a silent brotherhood. You see another man standing beside a shopping cart while his wife disappears into an aisle. You know. You don't need words. You just nod. He's waiting. He's been trained. I worked for decades. And I liked working. Not every minute. Nobody likes every minute of work. If somebody tells you they love every minute of their job, they're either lying or selling something. Work gave me structure. You woke up, you got dressed, you went somewhere, you did something, you came home. When you got home, work was finished. That's what I miss, leaving work. That magical moment when 5 o'clock arrived. You looked at the clock. You didn't say goodbye. You escaped. If your boss called your house at 7 in the evening, you knew something was wrong. Today, your boss can email you at 10:47 p.m., and your phone puts the message right in front of your face. Then your phone asks, would you like to respond? No, I would like to sleep. That's what I would like to respond to. People talk about work-life balance. We had work-life balance. It was called Saturday and Sunday. 2 whole days where nobody expected you to attend a meeting from your kitchen. There was no Zoom, no Teams, no Slack, no quick call. A quick call was actually quick. Hello? Can you come in tomorrow? No. Okay. Goodbye. Done. Today, a quick call requires an invitation, a password, a link, a microphone, a camera, a software update, and 20 minutes of somebody saying, can everyone hear me? No, we can't.
That's why nobody is talking. Then somebody says, I think you muted. That's the most common sentence in modern business. I think you're muted. Maybe that's the point. Maybe the smartest employee in the company is the person who is permanently muted.
Then somebody shares the wrong screen. Then somebody's internet freezes. Then somebody says, Sorry, I'm having technical difficulties. Everyone waits. And finally, somebody says, Let's reschedule. That's not a meeting. That's a hostage situation. I retired from all of that. I thought, now I can relax. My wife said, Absolutely. The next morning, Frank? Yes? Since you're retired, I should have moved out. Can you clean the garage? I said, Sure. Then, can you fix the fence? Sure. Can you paint the guest room? Sure. Can you organize the basement? Sure. Can you take the car in? Sure. Can you call the plumber? Sure. Can you pick up groceries? Sure. Can you help your brother? Sure. I stopped. I said, When exactly am I relaxing? She said, You can relax when you're done. When you're done. That phrase is dangerous because the list never ends. You finish one thing, another appears. I fixed the sink. My wife said, Thank you. I smiled.
Then, while you're at it, no, while you're at it. That phrase has destroyed civilizations. While you're at it, could you? No. I retired from work. I did not retire from being useful. There's a difference. My wife calls me useful. That's a very polite word. Useful means I can still reach things. At 68, you become household equipment. My wife says, Frank, can you get that down? I say, What? That box. Why don't you get it? Because you're taller. That's not romance. That's physics. Then she says, Frank, can you move this? Why? Because you're stronger. That's also physics. At some point, I realized my retirement was simply a career change. I used to have a boss. Now I have my wife. My old boss gave me deadlines. My wife says, Whenever you get a chance. That is worse. Whenever you get a chance means I expect it before dinner. My old boss had performance reviews. My wife has facial expressions. My old boss gave me a paycheck.
My wife gives me a grocery list. My old boss said, Good job. My wife says, You missed a spot. I miss my old boss. Retirement also changed how I look at money. When you're young, you think money is for buying things. When you're older, money is for paying for things you don't remember buying. You spend your entire life saving. Then retirement comes, and suddenly everything has a monthly fee. Insurance, electricity, internet, phone, streaming, car, taxes, medicine. And apparently my refrigerator needs Wi-Fi. I don't want to pay a monthly fee for cold food. That's where I draw the line. Groceries have become a financial negotiation. I went to the supermarket with my wife. She put something in the cart. I looked at the price. I put it back. She said, Why did you put that back? I said, Did you see the price? Yes. You still want it? Yes. Why? Because we need it. I said, Do we? Yes. How badly? She looked at me. I said, I'm just asking. I have become the kind of man who compares prices on ketchup. When I was 30, I didn't care. Now I stand in the aisle looking at 2 bottles of ketchup like I'm evaluating stocks. This one is 79 cents cheaper. My wife says, Frank, it's ketchup. I say, That's how they get you. She says, Who? The ketchup people. She walks away. I follow. I have become very careful with money. My wife says I'm cheap. I say I'm financially responsible.
She says, "You spent $90 on a drill." I say, "It's a good drill." "We have a drill. Not like this one." "What does this one do?" "Everything." "What does the old one do?" "Drill." She looks at me. I say, "Exactly." She says, "You bought another drill to do the same thing." I say, "You bought another pillow." She says, "It's decorative." I say, "My drill is functional." She says, "Your drill doesn't make the house look nice." I say, "It makes holes." She says, "That's not the same." I say, "It is to me." That's marriage.
Two people have different definitions of necessity. My wife has 17 decorative pillows. I have 3 power tools. She says I have too many tools. I say, "That's impossible." She says, "You only use one." I say, "That's because the others are backup." Backup for what? I don't know yet. That's the beauty of tools. You don't need to know. Someday something will happen, and I'll be ready. That's what I tell myself. My favorite place now is Costco. Costco is dangerous when you're retired. You go in for toothpaste, you come out with enough toilet paper to survive a natural disaster. You go in for milk, you leave with a patio set. My wife says, "Why did we buy this?" I say, "It was a good deal. We don't need it. It was on sale. You saved $40. Yes. You spent $200. Yes. So you didn't save $40. I said, "That's not how Costco works." Costco has its own mathematics. If you buy something you don't need because it's cheap, you saved money. If you buy something you need because it's expensive, you lost money. That's Costco logic. I once bought a 40-pack of batteries. My wife said, "We don't need 40 batteries." I said, "Not today." She said, "Then why buy 40? "Because someday we will." "When?" "I don't know." She said, "Frank, you're 68. I said, "Exactly. I understand preparation." Then we bought a 12-pack of mayonnaise. I said, "We're going to need it." She said, "No human family needs this much mayonnaise." I said, "Maybe not this month." Retirement changes your relationship with time. You start buying for the future. The future becomes a very important customer. You buy things for someday. Someday I'll fix that. Someday I'll read that. Someday I'll organize that. Someday I'll lose weight. Someday I'll use that exercise machine. I have an exercise bike in the basement. It was expensive. I used it 4 times. Now it holds laundry. That's not failure. That's repurposing. My wife says, "You should exercise." I say, "I do." She says, "When?" I say, "When I move the laundry off the bike." She doesn't laugh. Marriage is a difficult audience. At 68, your body becomes a separate employee, and this employee has terrible attendance. When you're young, you wake up and your body works. You get out of bed, you stretch, you run, you bend. You don't think about it. At 68, getting out of bed is a team project. I wake up, I lie there, I evaluate the situation. Knees, present. Back, questionable. Shoulder, negotiating. Neck, no comment. I move one leg, something cracks. I stop. My wife says, "Are you okay?" I say, "Yes." "What was that?" "I don't know." "Was that your knee?" "Maybe." "Your back?" "Maybe." "You should see a doctor." I say, "That's why I'm staying in bed." My body now makes noises I don't remember ordering. I bend over, crack. I stand up, crack. Turn left, crack. Turn right, crack. My wife says, "You sound like a bag of potato chips." I say, "That's because I'm well seasoned."
She doesn't appreciate my humor. My knees have become weather instruments. The weather app says, sunny. My knees say, rain. I trust my knees. My knees have never lied to me. My left knee knows rain is coming 6 hours before the television. My right knee predicts cold fronts. My back handles natural disasters. I don't need a weather service. I just need to stand up. I went to the doctor. He asked, "Do you exercise?" "Yes." "How often?" "Every day." "What do you do?" "I get up." He looked at me. I said, "It's a big movement." He didn't laugh. Doctors don't laugh enough. I think medical school removes their sense of humor. The doctor said, "You should walk 30 minutes a day." I said, "I do." "How far?" "I don't know." "You should track it." "No." "You have a phone." "I know." "You can track your steps." "I don't want my phone judging me." He laughed. I said, "See? You can laugh." He said, I wasn't laughing.
Now I don't know what happened. My wife bought me a fitness watch. She said, "It will help you stay healthy." I said, "I already have a watch. This one tracks your heart." "My heart knows what it's doing." "It tracks your steps." "My legs know what they're doing." "It tracks your sleep." I was there. She gave it to me. Now every morning it tells me how badly I slept. I don't need that information. I woke up. I know. The watch says, "Your sleep quality was poor." I say, "Thank you." Then, "You woke up 4 times." I say, "I remember." Then, "Your sleep schedule is inconsistent." I say, "You're a watch." Then it tells me, "Stand up." I say, "I am standing." It says, "Good job." I don't need praise from a watch. My father never congratulated me for standing. He'd say, "Get up." That was enough. Technology is too encouraging. My watch congratulates me for walking 3,000 steps. Then it says, "You can do more." No, I can't. I'm 68. 3,000 steps is a small vacation.
My wife says, "You should get to 10,000. I say, "Why?" "It's healthy." "Who decided?" "Everyone." I say, "Everyone is younger than me." That's the problem. Health advice always comes from people who can run upstairs. I want advice from someone who has to think before standing up. That's my expert. Someone who says, "Take your time. Where are your glasses? Don't bend like that. Use the handrail." Now that's a health professional. Food has changed too. When I was young, you ate food. That's it. Now every piece of food has a resume. Calories, protein, carbohydrates, sodium, sugar, fiber, fat, ingredients I can't pronounce. I bought yogurt recently. The label was longer than my first mortgage. Low fat, good. High protein, good. No added sugar, good. Natural flavor. What is natural flavor? What flavor isn't natural? I don't want my yogurt to have a personality. My mother cooked dinner. We ate. Nobody took a picture. Nobody logged calories. Nobody scanned a barcode. Nobody asked, "Is this keto?" We had one diet. Don't eat the entire cake. That was it. And somehow we survived. My mother would say, "Eat your vegetables." I said, "Why?" "Because they're good for you." What do? They make you healthy. That was the entire scientific explanation. Today, vegetables have podcasts. Broccoli has a nutritional profile. Avocado has a lifestyle. Kale has a publicist. I don't trust food that has a publicist. I just want a sandwich, a normal sandwich. Bread, meat, cheese, maybe lettuce. No quinoa, no microgreens, no mysterious sauce, no 17 ingredients. Just food. I am 68. I have earned the right to eat a sandwich without an autobiography. I have grandchildren. I love them. They're smart. Very smart. Too smart. My grandson can fix my phone in 10 seconds. I can barely make the volume work. I call him. I say, Something happened to my phone. He says, "What?" I don't know. What does it do? Nothing. What's on the screen? I don't know. Send me a picture. How? He sighs. That's the sound of a young person realizing they're related to me. He comes over, he takes my phone, touches 3 things. Fixed. I say, "What did you do?" Changed the setting. What setting? The notification setting. Where was it? In settings. Where is settings? He looks at me. I look at him. He says, "Grandpa." I say, "What?" "It's right here." He taps the screen. I say, "I was looking for it." "No, you weren't." "I was." "You were in messages." "I thought settings were in messages." "Why?" "I don't know." He laughs. Then he walks away. That's how young people teach. They don't explain, they demonstrate. Then they leave. I told him, "You should write this down." He said, "You'll forget." I said, "Exactly, write it down." He didn't. Kids today don't understand what it was like before technology. I remember televisions with antennas. You had to stand up to change the channel. That was the remote. Me. My father would sit in his chair. "Frank, change the channel." I would say, "Why me?" "Because you're closest." I spent half my childhood walking across the room. That was exercise. We didn't need fitness watches. We had parents. My father didn't say, "Frank, you should get more steps." He said, "Get up." I got up. He said, "Go outside." I went outside. He said, "Come back when the streetlights come on." That was parental technology. No GPS, no tracking app, no screen time report. The streetlights were the screen time report. When they came on, you went home. Simple. Kids today get bored. My grandson says, "I'm bored." I say, "Good." He says, "What do I do?" "Nothing." He looks terrified. "Nothing?" "Yes." "What does that mean?" "It means nothing." "I'm bored." "I know." "What should I do?" "Be bored." He doesn't understand. We were bored constantly. You sat in the car, you looked out the window, you counted telephone poles, you stared at the ceiling. You played with a piece of string. You waited. Nobody died. Today, if the Wi-Fi goes down for 30 seconds, people start behaving like survivors of a shipwreck. My grandson once said, "The Wi-Fi is down." I said, "Okay." He said, "Grandpa?" "What?" "The Wi-Fi is down." "I heard you." "We don't have internet." "I know." "What are we going to do?" I said, "Talk." He looked at me, like I had suggested we build a radio. I said, "Come sit down." He sat. We talked for 5 minutes. Then he said, "When's the Wi-Fi coming back?" I said, "I don't know." He stood up. "I'll check." I said, "Check what?" "The router." I said, "Why?" "To see if it's working." "How do you know?" "I can tell." I said, "Can you tell if your grandfather is working?" He said, "What?" Never mind. The generation gap is interesting. My grandson knows how to use artificial intelligence. I still don't trust the microwave. He can create an image with a sentence. I still have photographs in a drawer.
He can translate languages instantly. I spent 10 years trying to learn Spanish. He can ask a machine anything. I still call the bank and wait for a human. And now everybody talks about AI, artificial intelligence. My grandson showed me one. He said, "Grandpa, you can ask it anything." I said, "Anything?" "Yes." I said, "Does it know where I put my glasses?" He said, "No." I said, then it's not that intelligent. My wife walked into the room. She said, they're on your head. I touched my head. There they were. My grandson started laughing. I said, I knew that. He said, no, you didn't. I was testing the AI. You were testing yourself. Same thing. My wife said, you're impossible. I said, and yet here we are. That's family. They know everything embarrassing about you, and they still come back. The trouble really started when my wife decided our house needed to become smart. I said, we already have a house. She said, but it isn't smart.
I said, neither am I, and I'm doing fine. She bought a smart speaker, then smart bulbs, then a smart thermostat, then a smart doorbell, then a smart television, then a smart refrigerator. I said, when does the house start making decisions? She said, it already does. I didn't like the sound of that. The first night, the lights turned off by themselves. I yelled, who's there? My wife said, the smart lights. I said, why did they turn off? Because nobody was moving. I said, I'm sitting down. They know. I said, that's not smart. That's surveillance. Then the thermostat started talking. I walked into the house. It said, welcome home, Frank. I stopped. I said, don't do that. My wife said, what? The thermostat. She laughed. It said, I noticed you usually arrive around 4:30. I said, that's creepy. It said, would you like me to adjust the temperature? I said, no. It said, okay. I stared at it. My wife said, Frank, it's just technology. I said, it knows when I come home. She said, so? So what else does it know? She said, nothing. The thermostat said, your preferred temperature has been set. I looked at my wife. She looked at me. I said, it knows my preferences. She said, yes. I said, this is how it starts. Then came the refrigerator. Beautiful machine, stainless steel, huge, touchscreen, Wi-Fi, cameras. I asked, why does the refrigerator need cameras? My wife said, so you can see what's inside when you're shopping. I said, I can remember what's inside. She said, you forget. I don't forget. She opened the refrigerator. There are 3 bottles of mustard. I said, I like mustard. You bought all 3. I was prepared. She said, for what? I don't know. She shook her head. The refrigerator started sending notifications. First, milk is running low. Fine. Then, eggs are running low. Fine. Then, you may want to add vegetables to your shopping list. I said, mind your business.
My wife said, what? Nothing. The refrigerator was becoming part of the marriage. Then one night I opened it at 11:42. The screen lit up. Late night snack? I said, no. I took out cheese. It said, are you sure? I said, yes. It said, your sodium intake today is above your recommended amount. I stared at the screen. I said, you're a refrigerator. It said, I understand. No, you don't. My wife walked into the kitchen. She said, what are you doing? I said, your refrigerator is judging me. She said, it gives recommendations. It has an attitude. She laughed. I said, don't encourage it. The next night, I opened the refrigerator again. It said, Frank, are you sure you need cheese? I said, yes. It said, this is your 3rd late-night snack this week. I said, who told you? It said, your activity history. I said, my activity history? It said, yes. I looked at my wife. She said, don't look at me.
You bought the thing. I thought it would help.
It is helping you spy on me. She laughed. Then the refrigerator beeped. I said, "Don't you start." The following week, I opened the freezer 6 times looking for ice cream. My phone buzzed. Unusual freezer activity detected. I said, "What?" The refrigerator beeped. I opened the door. It said, "You have accessed the freezer 6 times without removing an item." I said, "I was looking." It said, "Would you like to add ice cream to your shopping list?" I said, "Yes." It said, "Your wife has been notified." I froze. Literally. I said, "What?" My wife walked into the kitchen. She was smiling. I said, "Did it tell you?" She held up her phone. "Yes." I said, "This is an invasion of privacy." She said, "You wanted ice cream." "That isn't the point." "What is the point?" "The refrigerator is reporting me." She said, "You're married." I said, "That doesn't mean the refrigerator gets involved." She laughed. The refrigerator beeped again. I looked at it. I swear that refrigerator had an attitude. I said, "Don't look at me like that." My wife said, "Frank, it doesn't have eyes." I said, "That's what it wants you to think." Then I decided enough was enough. At midnight, I unplugged it. My wife walked into the kitchen. She said, "Why is the refrigerator off?" I said, "I unplugged it." "Why?" "I'm taking back control of my life." "Frank, that's the food." "I know." "You're going to spoil everything." "I'll take the risk." She stared at me. I stared at her. The refrigerator was silent. It was beautiful. Peace. Silence. Freedom. Then my wife said, "Plug it back in." I said, "No." "Frank, no. Please." I looked at the refrigerator. I looked at my wife. I plugged it back in. The screen came alive. It said, "Welcome back, Frank." I said, "You're enjoying this." My wife said, "It's a refrigerator." I said, "That's what it wants you to think." After the refrigerator started judging me, I began noticing something.
Everything in my life had become smart. My phone was smart. My watch was smart. My thermostat was smart. My refrigerator was smart. My television was smart. My car was smart. Apparently, I was the only thing in the house that wasn't. My car has sensors now. Everything is a sensor. I drive down the road. The car says, "Driver attention warning." I say, "I am paying attention." It says, "Please keep your eyes on the road." I say, "They are." It says, "Driver attention warning." I say, "What do you want me to do?" My wife says, "Stop arguing with the car." I say, "It's arguing with me." Modern cars have so many warnings: tire pressure, oil, lane departure, blind spot, driver attention, service required. My first car had one warning system. The engine made a terrible noise. That was it. You heard clank, clank, clank. You knew. Today the car doesn't make a sound. It puts a little symbol on the dashboard. You look at it. You have no idea what it means. You take a picture.
You send it to your grandson. He says, "That's your tire pressure." I say, "How does the car know my tire pressure?" "Sensors." When did tires become intelligent? They're not intelligent. Then why are they reporting me? I put air in the tire. The light stays on. I drive 20 miles. Still on. I say, "Now the car is lying." I take it to a mechanic. He plugs in a computer. The computer tells him the car is unhappy. I say, "Can you fix it?" "Yes." "How much?" He tells me. I say, "Can you just make the lights stay on?" He laughs. I wasn't joking. Everything has become a subscription. Music, television, cloud storage, apps, cars. I don't want my car to have a subscription. What happens if I stop paying? Does the steering wheel stop working? Does the car say, your premium driving experience has expired? Maybe the brakes become basic. Upgrade to premium braking for $14.99. Don't laugh. We're not far away. My grandson told me some cars can receive software updates.
I said, "What happens if you don't update?" He said, "You might miss features." I said, "My car already has features." "Like what?" "It drives." He laughed. "That's another difference. Young people want features. Older people want reliability. Give me a car that starts every morning. I don't care if it can order sushi. I don't need my car to know my favorite restaurant. I know it. I don't need the car to remind me where I parked. I remember, mostly. I don't need the car to greet me. I'm not lonely. I have a wife. She greets me by saying, 'Did you take the trash out?' That's enough human interaction." Then there's the phone. My phone knows too much. It knows where I am, where I've been, what I've searched, what I've bought, what I almost bought. It knows what I watched. It knows what I looked at for 3 seconds. It knows what I typed and deleted. I'm starting to think my phone knows me better than my wife. My wife knows I like cheese. My phone knows which cheese. My wife knows I watch football. My phone knows which team. My wife knows I snore. My phone probably has data. I don't want that. One morning my phone said, "Your screen time increased by 18% this week." I said, "Mind your business." My wife looked at me. She said, "What?" My phone is judging me. She said, "Maybe it's right." I said, "Whose side are you on?" She said, "The phone." I said, "Of course." Then the phone said, "Would you like to review your screen time?" I said, "No." It said, "Maybe later." I said, "Stop being passive-aggressive." My wife started laughing. I said, "It's not funny." She said, "You're arguing with your phone." I said, "It started it." This is where we are now. Machines have opinions, and apparently mine are wrong. I started thinking about the old days. People my age do that. We say, "Back then, things were better." That's not entirely true. Some things were better. Some things were terrible. We had 3 television channels. That wasn't better. It was terrible. If nothing was on, nothing was on. You couldn't search for something else. You couldn't watch a documentary at 2 in the morning. You had to wait until next Tuesday. We had cassette tapes. They got tangled. You had to use a pencil to rewind them. But you could make a mixtape. That was important. We had paper maps. They were impossible to fold. But you could throw them in the back seat and forget about them. We had photographs. You took a picture. You waited. Sometimes half of them were terrible, but that's what made them special. You didn't take 50 pictures of the same sandwich. You took 1 picture of your family, and everybody had to stand still. We had fewer photographs, but we looked at them more. We had fewer friends, but we knew them. We had fewer messages, but we talked longer. We had less technology, but we had more silence. That's what I miss. Silence. There used to be a time after dinner when nothing happened. No buzzing, no alerts, no emails. No notifications. No one knew where you were. You could sit on the porch. You could drink coffee. You could listen to the wind. A neighbor might walk by. You'd wave. That's it. You didn't need a notification to know somebody was there. Now people can have 2,000 online friends, and they don't know the person living next door. My phone once told me, "You have 1,847 friends." I said, "No, I don't. I have 6, maybe, and 2 of them are relatives." My phone has no idea. It thinks clicking accept means friendship. It doesn't. Friendship is someone calling you when you're sick.
someone helping you move, someone showing up when you need them, someone knowing you don't like onions, someone remembering your birthday without a notification. That's friendship, not a thumbs up. And family? Family is different. Family knows your worst stories and still invites you to dinner. My grandchildren know more about technology than I ever will, but I know something they don't. I know how to sit still.
I know how to wait. I know how to fix something with duct tape. I know how to make coffee without an app. I know how to find the right side of a roll of toilet paper without artificial intelligence. And I know how to tell when my wife is angry without a notification. That's a skill. You learn it over 41 years. I also know when she's about to say, "Frank, can you?" That's the one phrase I still haven't found a way to block. Last month, my wife decided we needed to clean the garage. I said, "We don't need to." She said, "We can't park in there." I said, "We have a driveway." She looked at me. I said, "Fine." That's another word I've learned. Fine means I understand that I'm going to lose. We opened the garage. There were boxes, tools, old clothes, Christmas decorations, things I hadn't seen since the Bush administration. My wife picked up an old box. "What is this?" I said, "Important." "What's inside?" "I don't know." She opened it. Old cables, a cassette player, 3 remote controls, an old phone, a broken radio. She said, "We should throw this away." I said, "No." "Why?" "Because it works." "It doesn't work." "It might." "Frank, I might need it." "For what?" I thought. "I don't know." That's the problem with men in garages. We don't know what anything is for, but we're confident we'll need it someday. My wife found an old telephone, a real telephone. Buttons, cord, no screen, no internet, no apps. She held it up. "What is this?" I said, "A phone." She said, "I know." I said, "No, a phone." She laughed. I said, "Look at it." It had one job. You picked it up, you dialed, it rang, somebody answered. That's it. I held it. I said, "You know what I like about this?" "What?" "It doesn't know anything about me." My wife laughed. "It doesn't track me." She laughed. "It doesn't judge me." She laughed. "It doesn't send you a notification." She stopped laughing. I looked at her. She looked at me. I said, "I'm keeping it." We put the old phone on the kitchen table. The smart speaker immediately said, "I didn't understand that." I said, "Good." The refrigerator beeped. The thermostat changed. The lights came on. My wife looked at me. "Did you do something?" "No." The speaker said, "Would you like help?" I said, "No." It said, "Okay." I looked at my wife. I said, "See?" She said, "See what?" "Everything wants to help." She laughed. Then I did something radical. I unplugged the smart speaker. Silence. Then the smart lights. Silence. Then the thermostat. Silence. Then the television. Silence. My wife looked at me. "Frank?" "Yes?" "What are you doing?" "I'm turning off the house." She laughed. Then I unplugged the refrigerator. She said, "Don't unplug the refrigerator." I said, "Why?" "Because there's food in it." I said, "Right." I plugged it back in. The screen came alive. "Welcome back, Frank." I said, "Don't." My wife laughed. We made coffee. Real coffee. No app, no notification, no smart device telling us what to do. We sat at the kitchen table. For 10 minutes, nothing happened.
No buzzing, no alerts, no messages. No refrigerator advice, no emails, no phone calls. Just coffee. My wife looked at me. She said, "This is nice." I said, "Yeah." She said, "We should do this more often." I said, "We should." Then my phone buzzed. We both looked at it. I ignored it. It buzzed again. My wife said, "Aren't you going to check?" "No." It buzzed again. I said, "Let it buzz." She smiled. Then the refrigerator beeped. We both turned. The screen said, "Your cheese expires tomorrow." I said, "See?" My wife laughed. I said, "It's still trying to control me." She opened the refrigerator. She took out the cheese. She looked at me. "Are you going to eat this?" "Absolutely." She said, "You've already had cheese today." I said, "I know." The refrigerator beeped. I pointed at it. "Don't." My wife smiled. Then she said, "Frank?" "Yes?" "Take out the trash." I sighed. I looked at the refrigerator, then at my wife. I said, "See?" She said, "What?" "The refrigerator doesn't run this house." She smiled. "No." I said, "You do." She said, "That's right." I said, "I knew it." She said, "Good. Take out the trash." I got up. I walked toward the garage. The smart lights came on. I said, "Thank you." The thermostat said, "Have a nice day, Frank." I said, "Don't tell me what to do." My wife yelled from the kitchen, "Frank?" I said, "Yes?" "Take the recycling too." I looked at the ceiling. I looked at the refrigerator. I looked at the smart lights. I said, "Which one of you told her?" The refrigerator beeped. I said, "I knew it." I'm 68 now. I've worked most of my life. I've been married for 41 years. I've raised children. I've watched grandchildren grow up. I've owned old cars. I've driven new cars. I've used rotary phones. I've used smartphones. I've written checks. I've paid bills online. I've used maps. I've used GPS.
I've owned a television with 3 channels. Now I have a television with more channels than there are countries. I've used a typewriter. I've used computers. I've seen technology go from something you turned on to something that knows when you wake up. And I think I've finally figured something out. Technology isn't the problem. Getting older isn't the problem. Retirement isn't the problem. The problem is that everything keeps changing while you remain the same person. You wake up one morning and realize the world you understood has become unfamiliar. The words change, the machines change, the rules change, the prices change, the way people communicate changes. And sometimes you stand in the middle of it all and think, when did this happen? But then you look around and you realize something else. You changed too. I used to think getting older meant losing things. Energy, speed, strength, time.
Now I think getting older means noticing things you didn't have time to notice before. When you're young, you're always rushing. Work, bills, kids, school, appointments, traffic, deadlines. You think you're going somewhere. Then one day you retire, and suddenly you realize you were already there. The little things mattered. Dinner with your wife, coffee in the morning, a phone call from your brother, your grandson fixing your phone, your wife yelling your name from another room, even the refrigerator telling you to stop eating cheese. Those are the things you remember, not the big plans, the little moments. My wife and I still argue. We still disagree about the thermostat. She still loses her keys. I still forget why I walked into a room. She still says, "Frank, can you?" I still say, "Sure." And then I ask, "What?" She says, "You know." I say, "No."
She says, "The thing." I say, "What thing?" She says, "Never mind." And somehow, 41 years later, we're still here.
That's marriage. It's not perfect. It's not supposed to be. It's two people repeatedly deciding, okay, let's try another day. And that's pretty good.
I've also learned something about retirement. You don't retire from responsibility. You retire from somebody else's responsibility. Now you have your own. You wake up and decide what matters. Some days that's fixing the fence. Some days that's watching the game. Some days that's going to Costco for something you absolutely do not need. Some days that's sitting on the porch with coffee. And some days you do nothing. And you know what? Nothing is underrated. My grandson says, "Grandpa, what are you doing?" I say, "Nothing." He says, "Nothing?" Yes. "Are you bored?" No. "What are you thinking about?" Nothing. He doesn't understand. That's okay. He'll understand someday. That's what age gives you. Not all the answers, just fewer reasons to panic when you don't have them. At 25, I wanted to know everything.
At 40, I wanted to control everything. At 55, I wanted everybody to stop bothering me. At 68, I just want my coffee hot and my wife not to move the thermostat. That's my retirement plan. I'm not asking for much. I've also learned that you don't have to understand every new thing. Some things can remain mysterious. I don't understand the cloud. I don't understand why my television needs an internet connection. I don't understand why my car needs software updates. I don't understand why my refrigerator needs Wi-Fi. I don't understand why my grandson can fix my phone without looking at the instructions. But I don't have to understand everything. I just have to keep moving. Even if my knees complain. Even if my back makes a noise. Even if my watch tells me I didn't sleep well. Even if the refrigerator asks, "Are you sure you need cheese?" Yes, I do, and I'm going to eat it. Because I'm 68. I've earned the cheese. My wife walks into the kitchen.
She sees me holding it. She says, "Frank?" I say, "What?" "You know the doctor said you should cut back?" I look at the refrigerator. The refrigerator beeps. I look at my wife. I look at the cheese. I say, "Everybody has an opinion." She says, "I'm serious." I say, "I know." She says, "Put it back." I say, "Okay." I put it back. Then I close the refrigerator. The refrigerator says, "Door closed." I say, "Thank you." My wife looks at me. She says, "Are you talking to the refrigerator?" I say, "No." She says, "You were." I say, "I was being polite." She laughs. I laugh. Then my phone buzzes. I look at it. It's a notification from my fitness watch. Time to stand. I look at the watch. I look at my wife. I stand up. My knees crack. My back cracks. My wife says, "Are you okay?" I say, "Yeah." She says, "What was that?" I say, "Everything." She laughs. I walk toward the living room. The smart lights turn on. The thermostat adjusts. The television wakes up. The refrigerator beeps.
My phone buzzes. My watch buzzes. My wife says, "Frank?" I stop. "Yes?" "Can you take the trash out?" I look around. I take a deep breath. I say, "Sure." Because that's what 68 years of life has taught me. You can't control everything. You can't stop technology. You can't stop prices. You can't stop your knees from making noises. You can't stop your grandchildren from knowing more about phones than you do. You can't stop your wife from saying, "Frank, can you?" But you can choose how you react. And sometimes the smartest thing you can do is take out the trash.
So I grab the trash. I open the garage. The smart lights come on. The doorbell camera watches me. My phone buzzes. The refrigerator beeps behind me. And just as I'm walking outside, my wife yells, "Frank!" I turn around. "What?" "Don't forget the recycling." I stare at her. She smiles. I look at the refrigerator. The refrigerator beeps. I point at it. I knew it. My wife laughs. I take the recycling.
And I walk outside. At 68, I'm still learning. I'm still laughing. I'm still married. I'm still working, just not for money. And I'm still eating cheese, just more quietly now. Because apparently, my refrigerator is listening. And if it tells my wife, I'm unplugging the whole house. Good night, everybody. I'm Frank. I'm 68. And tomorrow morning, I'm sleeping until 9. Unless my wife has another list, in which case, I'm suddenly very hard of hearing.